everyone, and welcome to the SSPI podcast by Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. This episode of the SSPI podcast is part of our Better Satellite World track of conversations, exploring how our industry is making a difference in the world. Accelerate Change, sponsored by SES, explores collaboration as an engine of innovation across the space and satellite industry. Today's episode, Accelerating Change, the SES Playbook, examines how SES is redefining the industry's long investment cycles. We'll talk about how we're accelerating differently, pairing agility with discipline, what the Intelsat acquisition means for integration and scale, and how SES is structuring yearly innovation through initiatives like Meosphere and Pathfinder. We're joined today by Nihar Shah, Chief Strategy Officer at SES. Nihar has been with SES since 2006, guiding its market development and long-term strategy, including the pivotal decision to invest in O3b Networks. With a background spanning consulting and global space policy, he brings both the historical perspective and the strategic lens that makes him the right person to walk us through SES's playbook today. Welcome, Nihar.
Thank you, Tamara. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the great work that SSPI does in promoting our industry and, from my perspective, promoting the talents in our industry. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying so. I'm going to jump right in because, I think SES has been the story for quite a little while now because you've got so many new and exciting things happening. So we really want to just learn a little bit more about how that's shaping up and what's going to mean for the future. I'll start like this. The space and satellite industry has long been shaped by slow, cyclical investment. And some would argue that those cycles actually do make sense, given the scale and risk involved with our industry. But the industry has tried to force speed through things like SPACs, for example. The results has often been harmful, maybe even a little bit predatory. So how does SES define acceleration differently and in a way that's sustainable for both the business and the industry?
That's a great question, complex question. Let me see if I can try to answer that. Mm-hmm. In terms of agility and speed, I think this is very essential in the new era, the new paradigm that we operate in today's commercial space industry. You have a situation where you have a system like Starlink, which is incredibly innovative, incredibly performant, and at a truly massive scale that we haven't seen before. But the key ingredient behind it is its ability to move extremely fast in terms of innovation, deployment, and scale. And so testament to that is what they've achieved in the last 48 months is something we haven't seen in our industry. I think so. That really has changed the game in terms of what does good look like, what do we all have to aspire to be, and we all need to learn from what they've been able to accomplish. I really look at them as sort of a bellwether for the industry. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to think about the legacy of our industry and where we came from. As you said, we had very long development cycles. Sometimes it would take 48 months to 60 months to develop one geostationary satellite from inception to design to development to launch to OSD, mm-hmm. Operation Service Delivery. And that obviously is something that is not sustainable in today's environment because not only is the ability to produce satellites changing, the ability to iterate on software cycles changing, the ability to innovate in terms of partner models changing, you need to be at the pace of the industry. And you need to be at the pace you need to be at to compete. So I think that is really driving a sea change in the way we think about speed and agility. So, that being said, we have a couple of new ways of doing this. One is really looking at where are the bottlenecks in our supply chain and understanding what kind of a supply chain do we need and what kind of operational cadence do we need, and what kind of investment draws do we need to compete in this new age. And this is where the idea of the meosphere comes from. And you probably heard Adele talk about that in Paris. And I know you're there enjoying the city, where we want to move away from that paradigm of, huge CapEx, multi-year procurements, and then a 30-year cycle to essentially monetize, a 15 to 15-year monetization cycle of the asset, because what that creates is several inefficiencies. Number one, it means that we have spikes or peaks in our CapEx, and then there's no spike or peak, which is unpredictability of CapEx, especially when market demand changes. Number two is when you design such a satellite on the past paradigm, you are effectively locking in a system parameter, you're locking in performance characteristics. You're not allowing that asset to be very flexible, especially when market demands are changing on the ground, and they're changing very fast on the ground, just like they're changing in space. So it locks you into what you can do with that asset. So you limit your flexibility. And then, of course, as new use cases evolve on the ground, the payload or design of that satellite is not really optimized to accelerate those totally new use cases that we never really thought about when we actually designed the satellite. So how do you prevent all of that from happening? We want to move into a more continuous innovation cycle where we launch batches of satellites or tranches of satellites on an incremental basis. And each tranche gets a little bit better, a little bit smarter, and a little bit cheaper on a per unit basis than the previous batch. And so with that, we can bring incremental capability to our system. We can have predictable, smooth CapEx flows through our business planning cycle and avoid this peak and valley system. And most importantly, we retain competitiveness and flexibility for a very dynamic market.
Yeah, that I find that really fascinating. The long cycle, like you say, really locks you into a particular set of requirements that may have moved on by the time the actual gigantic satellite was built. In today's world, things move so rapidly. I have a question though. When you talk about these tranches, are we speaking about the O3b Empower? What kinds of satellites are you building in these tranches?
So it's important to understand this is our initial concept, right? So we're really kind of through how this system will look, right? But if you think about it, we built O3b as our first generation MEO network, which is very much self-contained constellation. And then we built Empower, which again is a self-contained constellation. And yes, we learned things in MEO and we enhanced the capabilities of the system. But what it still meant was a discrete type of NRE, a discrete type of spending that goes into each constellation, because you look at a constellation as a constellation. It's an island in itself, right? What we want to do is then take that to the next level and say, how do we incrementally evolve that, not as a standalone island or constellation, but as a ever-growing, ever-evolving network that uses what came before, but incrementally improves on that on every cycle, right? So that's kind of the thinking is it's an ever-improving, ever-expanding network, and that network can change and evolve and adapt to what the market requirement is. It can be scaled down, it can be scaled up, it can change its certain capability sets through a lot of the software-defined programming that we have now to be able to adapt to what the market needs. So that's the way I would explain that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Smart, I think it sounds very. You may not know the answer to this yet because this is so very new. But where does Intelsat and the capability that came over to SES with that merger, with that acquisition, where does Intelsat fit into this new paradigm?
Very good question. A lot of people ask us that question and ask me that question is like, how does Intelsat fit into this idea of a future network? And I think, first of all, it's really important to understand the logic behind, the acquisition. So first of all, we're bringing together two very, very important, historic, and foundational companies in the commercial space sector, right? Intelsat and SES together, we have about 100 years of combined heritage in the space, and we stand for something in space. We have the largest combined GEO and MEO fleet in the world. We have access through our partnerships to, the OneWeb system and to Starlink. We have an incredibly powerful and pervasive ground network with teleports and POPs, in every continent of the world. And we serve a huge set of customers across diversified verticals, whether it's media, whether it's avionics, aeronautical, whether it's maritime, whether it's government, or whether it's the telco base that we have. So we have some very impressive capabilities. We have a very impressive book of business that's highly diversified and has solid blue chip customers behind that. And of course, have access to a lot of different types of spectrum. And as you know, based on recent developments, spectrum is incredibly valuable. It's the lifeblood of our system, the lifeblood of our space economy. And I think that all together brings a profound level of capability in the combined company. And the reason I say this is the industry is moving to a big boys game. It's not about, the 30, 40, 50 very small, undersized operators that existed in the past. It is about people who can harness huge amounts of capital, huge amounts of technological capability, huge amounts of spectrum, and huge amounts of market access to be players in the industry. And so we fundamentally believe that scale is extremely important in this new environment that we're moving into. And I think you can see that in our peer group. There's been a lot of consolidation. Didn't happen for decades. It is happening now. So that was reason number one. Now, the question is, scale for the sake of scale isn't very important. What you then have to do is harness synergy, right? So you would need to do what you used to do with, a certain set of resource. You can do double that with the same resource. So how do you become much more efficient and take a lot of those unnecessary costs out of the system and make it lean and efficient, and then redeploy those costs, the savings, what we call synergies in the business, into new, more productive, more efficient uses, which is building the network of the future. So that's the way we look at it. These companies had to come together to create the consolidation effect of scale and synergy. And using that scale and synergy, we can then redeploy capital to where the market is actually going and growing.
Yeah. And okay. So when you have, first of all, I need to say this because I came into the industry a lot of years ago when Intelsat and SES were like some of the biggest names you could possibly say in the industry, and dazzling. And it's so dazzling to me now that set of capacity and legacy and industry development is now telling one story. And so with that, I first of all want to say congratulations. I saw the new logo. It's gorgeous, and it captures very effectively both the sense of legacy and the look forward. So congratulations on that.
We're very proud of the logo, and we're very proud of the new branding. And I hope it conveys a story of both our heritage but also what we want to be together.
I saw it immediately. I looked and said, I didn't know that was even possible, but somehow that looks like Intelsat and SES came together and made something new and beautiful. So really, congratulations to your team for that. When you think about this idea, well, let me go back. One of the things that Adele mentioned on stage at the WSBW show is this idea of doing research in space. Like, in other words, we're going to launch the satellite. We're going to see what's working, not working. And I think he called it Pathfinder, but I only somewhat caught that. So can you walk me through that a little bit and what that actually means and what that's going to look like for you guys going forward? Or is that the same thing you're telling me about the tranches, this tranche first and then the next tranche?
Sure, I can explain it. It's actually part of that same story, but it's a different facet to that you just pointed out. And I'm glad you did, because it's an important element of how do you innovate. Mm-hmm. Once you understand, where our innovation cycle needs to be, the first question we ask ourselves is, how do you disrupt that? Because there is obviously a concern in the industry that, if we continue to rely on our legacy supply chain, we could be in trouble because they have not been able to keep up with the pace and the innovation and the performance and the efficiencies that some of our better funded competitors have been able to. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them are trying, but there's clearly now emerged a gap in performance. And that gap in performance is because of how you apply disruptive innovation to what was a legacy business. When you look at the ecosystem in the United States, in Europe, and Asia, in terms of what we call the new space ecosystem, which is the incredible number of startups, many of which are funded through venture capital, many of which are actually funded through some of the people who founded SpaceX, for example, as one example. There is a lot of talent, a lot of great ideas, a lot of engineering, a lot of innovation that's happening. So one of our core principles was, how do we tap into this vibrant ecosystem of startup new space and figure out, do they have the solutions to our problems? And how do we harness them to that effect? And so that is what we are actually trying to do with this continuous innovation cycle. How do we bring in new space disruption and new space innovation into our ecosystem, into our supply chain, and change what we build, how we build it, how fast we can build it? Now, of course, with disruption and innovation comes a higher element of risk, because you're doing something that you haven't tried before, that doesn't have, the 50, 60 years of heritage, et cetera. And we understand that. And there's a time and place for that kind of space-proven hardware and heritage. And there's also time and space to take risk on innovation and disruption. So the way we do that is to engage in what we call Pathfinder missions. And I think that's probably what Abdel said. I wasn't in Paris. I don't remember exactly what he said. But I think that's what he was trying to explain, is that when you do engage with the new space companies and you like what they do, you like their approach, you like what they've been able to demonstrate, you still want to be able to lower your overall risk. And you do that through Pathfinder missions, which are basically micro missions that test certain components, that test certain systems, that test how they actually work in space and what is the ConOps that would be around that. And that gives us more confidence around how will the system actually work and perform in a fully deployed commercial environment. So we have a series of what we call Pathfinder missions with some of our new space partners to do exactly that, to validate and test performance in space.
You are listening to The Better Satellite World, the longest running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI, Hughes, Access Intelligence, the American Space Exploration Fund, and Qvia. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by GSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. In September and November, join SSPI and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world, the Roundtable is a real New York event you cannot miss. You can now register for our next New York Space Business Roundtable, which will be on September 30th. Call or raise Europe Bets on Sovereign Space. To register for this upcoming roundtable, visit sspi.org/events. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
I love that. You guys, underwrote this podcast series specifically on this idea of collaboration. And what I think I'm hearing you say is that you're bringing the full bear of the legacy and experience that you bring to the table to underwrite or co-sign the energy of the new space and make those two things work together, which I think is kind of brilliant. Am I catching that right? Am I understanding you correctly?
You're absolutely right. And actually, you put it a lot better than I could have put it. So I think you just nailed it on the head, right? So, I like what you said, is that you're using the legacy of don't want to call it old space, but the legacy of space to underwrite future of space. And it's not only the reallocation of capital, but it is also combining the view on what works and learning and heritage and risk mitigation that we can bring to the table with the incredibly new ideas and mentality and mindset of what new space is. Together, this combination is actually really good. And it improves, the deployment of capital into new space and harnessing new space, but it also takes what we have learned as operators and applies that to an actual applied technology model. So it's actually well put. I hadn't thought about it like that, but you actually took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, because the thought that was running through my head, this is, of course, not a question I asked. I sent you ahead of time, and it may be a question that you very tactfully step aside from. But what goes through my mind with the merge of the scale of SES and Intelsat coming together is just the legacy of talent. The people who are behind the success of both organizations thus far, and their habits. People have a way of doing stuff. And how do you bring that experience forward in a way that allows that experience to be successful and useful and not a drag on innovation?
Very good question. And again, I think talent is so important. Without people, we don't have a company, right? And talent really powers you through, not only in terms of how you run the business and how you interact with your customers and how you process, orders and service delivery and software, which is the guts and the mechanics of operations. But it also helps with your innovation. But most importantly, you need to have the skill set and the mindset to evolve with changing times. And I think all of these things are important. And that's one of the reasons we have focused so much on organizational behavior, bringing a change in our culture and our purpose and our values. It's not just the nice brand that you see in the colors and the logos, but it's really spending a lot of time in trying to understand what makes people tick and how do we give them a higher purpose and how do we bring those teams together. Of course, that's even more important as we bring two companies together. And there will be some very difficult choices that we have to make. And that's one of the difficult parts. And, the wrenching parts of this is that ultimately does affect people and people's jobs. But we tried to do that in a very transparent way, in a very considerate way, and in a very respectful way, right? So we understand that's going to happen, but we also want to make sure that the people who can contribute into what we are trying to do have a space safe to be able to innovate and be part of that future. So, it is a balancing act, the harnessing of talent, the nurturing of talent, the retention of talent, but also just treating people with a lot of respect, appreciation, and kindness. It's a very difficult balancing act. I don't think anybody has the magic formula, but we're definitely trying to do that in the best way we can.
Yeah. I as you were speaking about that, what was just running through my mind is the dramatic shakeups happening at government levels, but even prior to our really transformative and disruptive current moment here in the United States, there's always been that transfer, right? Like people serve in militaries and they gain experience and lifelong service, and then they transition. And so many people have found a home in commercial space, bringing that legacy of experience. And I wonder if some of that can be reasonably expected because of the transformation happening at the new SES, but also because you have this network of partners that you're collaborating with, whether, and again, the answer to this is most likely, I don't know, but will some of these people who've had so much success with Intelsat and SES prior find new homes with some of these these new space companies, because they're bringing some of the capacities that are going to help those new space companies be successful with the new SES?
Absolutely. I can tell you are a true student and veteran of our industry because you ask very, very pertinent questions. And that's a great point. I think, look, the way I look at it is I've been with SES for many years, through many incarnations. I started with New Skies and we became World Skies, and then we joined with O3b, and we had a whole bunch of different acquisitions. And now we're SES, and now we're joined with Intelsat. And one thing I have found is we have a very rich fraternity, i.e. people come to SES, they learn, they make connections, they make an impact, they make a difference. And they may leave SES, many of which found new companies, or they lead other companies, legacy companies, new space companies. Some people move into government, and some people move into policy, and some people move into the defense sector. In fact, all kinds of new things within the overall space economy and the space ecosystem. But there's such a feeling of camaraderie and friendship and professionalism between what I call the alumni, right? The SES alumni or the Intelsat alumni, that you can always tap into them at any moment in time, because their skills at any given point in time may not be the right fit for SES or Intelsat, but it may be a perfect fit for some of these new space companies or some older legacy companies or any other actor in the space ecosystem. So it's really I like what you said, and I agree with what you said, that it's a very, our industry is enriched by people coming in and leaving and coming back. Many people have actually come back to SES, believe it or not. This flow of people and the flow of ideas actually makes the industry what it is. So I absolutely believe everybody has a role to play. It's just a matter of where you find your groove and when you find it. And if that matches up with your employer, that's perfect. And if it doesn't, you find your groove with somebody else. And actually, there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. This is just a fascinating moment. I thank you for calling me a student of the industry. I'm going to write that on a shirt somewhere and try to live up to it.
I meant it only in the best way. So, yeah.
But what you said is, I see that all over the industry, and I tell people this. I say one of the things that I love about being in this industry is that everybody knows everybody, and everybody find you. If you wait just long enough, you'll see somebody somewhere else, and it's just the way it works. And it's such a beautiful thing that we have this interconnectivity. Let me change gears just a little bit. So you're designing Meosphere. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that even means. But as you're serving your wide array of customers, governments, broadcast, mobility, how does the customers shape what the Meosphere is going to be? And let's start with a backtrack of what is the Meosphere going to be? What's that even mean?
Okay. I will try to explain the Meosphere. So we're operationalizing a concept of a growing network in space, and it's foundationally it is in MEO, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why we have selected MEO. But I think being the operator that has been first to step into MEO and commercialize MEO, and we have over a decade of experience in MEO, and all the orbital characteristics of what you can do from MEO. We believe that's the right place to be. It lends itself to a orbital architecture that's constellation-based or network-based, as opposed to the discreteness of GEO versus the mass industrial production required for LEO. Mm-hmm. It's actually called the operational sweet spot for a company like SES. So that's why we selected LEO. Now, the question then becomes, what does this grow to become? So I already mentioned a few ideas around it's an evolving network. It requires not waterfall-based CapEx, but a cascade of continuous CapEx. It is incremental in its innovation capability. It incorporates new space. And it's fundamentally about incremental improvement. Now, what will it do? Great question. Of course, one of its primary missions is to support our future network customers. And today, as you know, SES, Intelsat, we have a huge business serving governments across the world, not only in the United States and Europe, but across the world for government defense applications, sovereign applications. We also have a very robust aeronautical business for commercial aviation and business jets. We also have a cruise business, which we all know, which we pioneered with the O3b system. We also have a large telco and fixed data enterprise business. And of course, we have a media business for which we are most well known for and is foundational to our history. So these are kind of the applications, or we call them the verticals that we operate in. And let's leave media aside for a second, because as you know, media is a different kettle of fish, right? It's a different type of business model. It's a different type of use case. It requires a different type of satellite architecture that's more broadcast based. So if I just put media aside for a second and focus on the networks, we want to serve the businesses that we are in today. We want to provide them with better performance, better capabilities, so that their businesses can grow and their businesses can get better, and they can actually incrementally improve the nature of their business and the scope of the business and what kinds of things they can actually offer their customers. We just look at the cruise business as an example. So much of the innovation we see on today's modern cruise ship, if you've been on a cruise ship, it's pretty wild experience, right? It's so digital, and it's so it has such a high orientation to deep customer experience. It kind of knows what you're going to do. It knows what your preferences are going to be. It's able to track you and your kids, your luggage, help you with ordering things, help you plan out your day. It's a very immersive digital experience on a modern cruise ship. And that only exists because the connectivity is phenomenal. And the connectivity, I can tell you, was not phenomenal 8 to 10 years ago. It was, you were getting bandwidth on the trickle. Now the pipes are opened up, the latency is so much better. You can unleash a lot of innovation performance. So this is the catalyst effect of having awesome connectivity. It just opens up your downstream ecosystem in ways that you couldn't imagine. I don't think even the cruise ships realized what you could actually do once you had that connectivity. And I think that applies to all of our downstream segments. So the first and foremost mission for the Meosphere is to provide that next level of connectivity and capability to our existing customer base, especially the core segments that I just mentioned that we believe are our highest value verticals. So that's number one. Number two is this innovation that we're bringing into the supply chain actually helps us create what we call the platform for innovation, and that you'll hear that a lot from when you go to our website. We are trying to build a platform for innovation. So it's not just the connectivity that we are going to enable, but this platform will allow us to do many, many new things, including, for example, hosted payloads, including, for example, further refining our relay system so we can talk to the LEOs, whether they're comms LEOs like direct-to-device systems, or whether they're Earth observational LEOs or any other type of application in LEO. Because of the nature of the MEO orbit, we can actually talk to these constellations and relay traffic in and out of those constellations to ground stations in a much more efficient way without the need for huge amounts of CapEx, and in fact, to improve the latency of such backhaul links. So we're opening up different types of use cases with this Meosphere. And of course, it also allows us to serve what we call the sovereign requirements of our governments, whether that's sovereignty on their ground stations, sovereignty in some of the waveforms that they use, sovereignty in ownership and security around those constellations. This capability that we will have in the Meosphere will fully enable the expression of sovereignty in space, which, as you know, it's like super important. I know you were in Paris and you probably heard about how important space sovereignty is. So it's a multi-mission, multi-application type of construct in the Meosphere. It's not just about the connectivity, but it's about a lot more. And a lot more is kind of the direction SES is trying to take our new business.
Wow. Thank you for that. Well, you brought it up. We're actually having a conversation on the 30th of September here in New York about European sovereignty and just what that's even going to mean and how people can play in that space from outside of Europe. Is sovereignty so exclusive that nobody else can participate? So I'm really kind of intrigued by the way that you're framing this idea of sovereignty. it's not just the equipment, but that it's the actual signal is that nation's sovereign space. And I think that's what I heard you say. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I find that a little fascinating if I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah, I think everybody has sort of a very dogmatic view of what sovereignty is, right? And sovereignty ultimately means you are in control, right? And how much you want to be in control of is your choice, and we give you that choice. Some people want end-to-end sovereignty. Every single thing in the system has to be mine. If that's what you want, that's why you have your own dedicated military satellite systems that are common among many of our European allies and the United States. We have dedicated military systems. But that construct, I think, is yesterday's news, right? It's that and something else. What is the something else that the commercial sector can bring so that the features of sovereignty that you take for granted on your own systems, your dedicated military systems, you also can reap the benefits of those on a commercial system in a way that they're harmonized together, right? So it's really allowing them to get the benefits and features of sovereignty at the level they want. That's the way we look at enabling sovereignty in a commercial context.
Thank you very much for that. I may quote you on that. So thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up. We're right at the end. I think I want to ask you a question. I have asked you already. The closing question that I originally sent you has been touched on already in the conversation, but let me close with this. As SES has set forth this series and demonstrated through the partners you've recommended we talk to what collaboration might mean, is it your hope or goal to see the industry pick up on this kind of collaboration to advance the industry as a whole? Or was there some other big picture idea that you had in mind for this series?
Look, this is my first time on the series, so thank you for inviting me. I didn't really know what to expect, other than to get some good questions. I think, look, there's a couple of big elements in this, right? One is learning about innovation, right? We have learned through our own experience, with the geostationary platforms, with O3b, with Empower. We have learned a lot, and learning is super important. How do we apply our learnings to what we do next? I think is super important in strategy. That's one big theme, and you see the expression of our learning in our idea around the meosphere. We saw the bottlenecks and said, how do we change that equation? Another big thing is around industry collaboration. I mean, we have built in this industry too many islands of interoperability or non-interoperability, I would say. And then you saw what that meant when somebody came in at scale and said, we have one system, one standard, one antenna, one waveform, take it or leave it. And I'm going to deploy this at scale. And that's kind of, the massive impact that Starlink has had. We should not be shy to recognize that. And then how an industry or ecosystem that was all federated or confederated, I should say, among proprietary could not act, right? So I think that's another learning for the industry, is that we must converge on standardization. And I know there's a ton of work being done through various consortiums on standardization, on software, on waveforms, but also, why not in some of the processes, even the industrial processes, how do we standardize that? But most importantly, I think the NTN revolution, again, something you probably heard about a lot in Paris, which is the 5G NTN standard, that actually has the ability to finally say that is the reason we will eventually standardize. Because by eliminating all of the proprietary nature of things, by eliminating, in many instances, the whole antenna problem, you automatically move into a converged 5G ecosystem. Not only is that good for the industry, but then we become just native fabric to the telco space, which is exactly where we need to be. We cannot be separated from telco. We're just another layer of that fabric. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening in terms of standardization, which I think is very important. And then, and last but not least, I mean, it's about embracing new space a lot. We've had some really amazing experiences with some of our partners. I look at some of our competitors, and I'm very much amazed and very much in awe of what they've been able to accomplish through disruptive innovation. So we need to get a little bit of that in our sector to be able to truly flourish. So I think those are kind of my big picture things. I talked a little bit about a consolidation and why consolidating the legacy industry is important to create stronger, more powerful, more resource-based competitors. But yeah, I think that was my overall thoughts on this.
Nihar, you have been an excellent interview, and so thank you so much. I learned a lot. I feel like I have a lot more to learn because this is a really big change, but I really appreciate it. So thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes today's episode, Accelerating Change, the SES Playbook. We are grateful for Nihar Shah of SES for joining us. We also thank SES for their leadership in underwriting this series, which has brought vital conversations about collaboration as a tool of innovation and acceleration to the industry. The SSPI podcast is made possible by the support of SSPI's professional, student, and corporate members. We're especially grateful for our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, producers of Via Satellite Magazine, the American Space Exploration Fund, the law firm of Clyde & Company, Hughes, an EchoStar company, and Qvia. You can find today's episode and all past episodes at sspi.org/SSPI-podcast. To subscribe, look for the SSPI podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe on YouTube at SSPI Video. That's all one word. For SSPI and our producer, Ari Yates, I'm Tamara Bond Williams. And for the people and companies building a space and satellite future worthy of our highest aspirations, thank you for all you do.